Welcome to the Doherty Water for Food podcast. Since 2010, the Doherty Water for Food Global Institute at the University of Nebraska has worked toward one goal, a food and water secure world. One in which global food security is ensured without compromising the use of water to meet other essential human and environmental needs. It's a daunting vision, but one that is vitally important. This podcast amplifies the voices of those making waves in this space. We hope you enjoy today's episode.
Hi, I'm Frances Hayes, DWFI Director of Communications and Public Relations, and your host for today's episode of the Water for Food podcast. Today I'm joined by Arindam Malakar, Water Research Scientist at the Nebraska Water Center, which is a part of DWFI, and Marie Krasnick, Assistant General Manager of the Upper Big Blue Natural Resources District in Nebraska. Together, they're monitoring Nebraska's Vadose Zone, which is the area between crop roots and the water table, also the upper boundary of the aquifer. So thank you both for joining me today, and let's go ahead and get started. So Arindam, I was wondering if you could start off our conversation by explaining why the Vadose Zone is such a critical region for groundwater quality and why it's so important for long-term study.
So, Francis, thanks again for inviting me today here. As you mentioned, Vadose Zone is the zone from land surface until you hit the groundwater table. And generally, we call it the skin of the earth. So when you think of skin, it's very thin, right? So compared to Earth's diameter, it's definitely a very thin area. But this is the zone through which whatever we're doing on the surface goes through and finally makes it to the groundwater resources. So it's a critical interface between the land surface and the groundwater system, so kind of a conduit. And it has been termed as a filter too, because some of the contaminants can stay there for very, very long time. So the way I see Vadose Zone is more like a time capsule where past things that has been done on the surface, you can find relics of it at the deeper Vadose Zone profile. So basically collecting soil at the deep area, you might understand what was done almost 10, 20, 30, or 50 years ago. I also see it in the other way too, which is a time machine. So if we are able to quantitatively identify how the contaminants are moving through this profile, we can actually estimate when the groundwater quality can take a hit from all these contaminants that has been residing in the Vadose Zone. So for me, it's a very dynamic system. So it's kind of a zone which you want to look at for designing a proactive methods to protect the groundwater quality. So you did ask about long-term studies. So as I did mention that some of these surface practices that was done, let's say 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, may show up at a very later stage. So long-term studies are really necessary for really understanding how contaminants are moving through the Vadose Zone, because that movement may not be too fast and may not be way too slow also. So that can be like, it can take anywhere between 3 to 6 years if it's really fast moving Vadose Zone, primarily made of sand, and sometimes it can be very slow. So this long-term studies actually give you a very quantitative idea how contaminants are moving through it. And most importantly, now we are realizing that Vadose Zone is not just a highway, for the contaminants to move through, but there can be reactions, both biological and chemical, that can occur in this zone and can control how groundwater quality is getting deteriorated. So you can convert some of these contaminants to some other things or kind of remediate too. So that's another reason why you want to do long-term studies, to see how this monitoring of these contaminants work, both as quick pulses or gradual release of some of these contaminants.
Great, thank you. So my understanding is that the Nebraska Water Center takes soil cores, sometimes all the way down to the water table, and maybe you can talk about how deep those go. But can you also explain the process for how you collect those cores, how many samples are taken across the state, and how often you do that to get the data that you need for this long-term study?
So Nebraska Water Center has been working very closely with multiple NRDs, and Upper Blue NRDs, one of the NRD that we are working right now. And the way this works is primarily there are needs from these NRDs to understand how nitrogen or nitrate specifically is moving through the Vadose Zone, and they really want to understand how quickly or how long it will take the groundwater will be contaminated. So these studies have been going for a long time. So generally, NRDs would come up. They would actually give us an idea about the location where they want to focus on. They would, of course, take input from our side also. Dr. Dan Snow has been doing this for quite a few years before I started back in the summer of 2021. So they would interact with each other. They would talk that why I want to do this. So if let's say if an NRD does not have any course at all, so it's more of an exploratory. So you want to go out and collect as many cores as possible covering the entire region to get an preliminary understanding that how nitrate profiles look like across the NRD. However, let's say as this has been going on for quite some time, from our records, if you go up, look at Nebraska Vadose Zone webpage, some of these cores were collected in 1980s. So I think that is where we started really collecting these Vadose Zone cores before even I was born and started recording that how the nitrate profile looks like. And so we have historical locations already known. So there, which has, let's say, 1 or 2 or even 3 data points for the past 40, 50 years. So generally in these newer studies, NRDs would recommend us to go back. And we also want to go back to those same locations because we want to collect the core from that same region to see, okay, fine, if my pulse was at, let's say, 5 feet, over the 10 years, where is that moved? Has it moved to 10 feet, 20 feet? So that gives us a quantitative idea that, okay, fine, this is how the pulse is moving, the nitrate plume is moving. Or if there's some changes to the nitrogen nitrate levels also or not, because there might be some practices that is being installed or applied at the surface. Does it make any change or not? So the NRDs would identify that these are the zones that we want to highlight. Sometimes there might be different phases also based on the groundwater quality. So if it is like a phase which has very poor quality of water, nitrate level is big above the maximum contaminant level of 10 milligram N per liter, can be only studied 2 instead of the entire NRD. So to see if things have changed in the Vadose zone or not, and how long will it take to pump out the entire nitrate. So then once we identify the locations, we then bring our coring equipment from the university, especially from Conservation Survey Division. We go out there. We do have a preliminary idea about the depth of the water table, so how thick this Vadose zone is. Depending on the thickness, we use multiple tools. So if the thickness is not, let's say, within 50 feet, we would generally use a geoprobe and go out there, collect the sample and back them. Depending on the study, we would move them right away or keep them in an oxy glove bag too, and then bring it back to the lab where it is processed to analyze nitroammonium concentrations. Now, if it is more than 50 feet, we generally have to use the CME auger, which is again through the Conservation Survey Division here at the School of Natural Resources. In some locations, we also collect the groundwater. So as soon as you're hitting the water table, you can collect water. So in some locations, we do collect these fresh water samples too. Most of the studies we also do, especially the NRDs, also do hand-in-hand monitoring wells sampling, which we correlate with our Vadose Zone study. Since 1980s, I think we collected north of 21,000 soil samples, processed close to more than 52,000 feet of soil sediments. And I think it will be more than 1,500 actual Vadose Zone cores that were collected over the past, since 1980, I would say. And we are continuously doing this research, bringing in federal funding too to do this research and getting support from NRD to get more information on collecting all of this. And when you say about how often we do it, like the Hastings utility study, they really like doing it every 5 years cycle. And they want us to go back to those same locations because they want to see, okay, how quickly my nitrate pulse is moving. And is there any change, especially in the top layers, because we have made some changes in how this water is or how nitrogen is getting applied on the surface. So they are really interested in learning all of that too.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I was just really interested in like the process of how you collect those and know how deep to go. So, you talked a little bit about this already, but I was wondering how the samples are used to understand and predict groundwater quality issues for Nebraskans. I know that's very top of mind for a lot of people in our state. So, talk about how it shows us kind of the historical aspect of water, what we're putting into the soil, and also how it might be a predictor for groundwater quality issues coming up and how maybe people have used that. And I think we can touch on that one during Marie's section as well.
one thing that we generally, as I mentioned to you before, is that the way I see Vadose Zone is both as a time capsule and as a time machine. So one thing that NRDs are really interested in is that, okay, how quickly, or especially along with the utilities too, that how quickly do you think this nitrate pulse is going to contaminate my groundwater resource? Because once groundwater is contaminated, the only way that we are doing it right now is to do treatment. So either it is a point of use treatment, like giving out reverse osmosis systems, or a community scale treatment that we are doing, that we're right now doing at Hastings Utilities, right? So they have this RO unit, which is again recharging water, trying to get the nitrate concentration down. So the primary information that really of interest to our NRD partner is to understand how quickly groundwater is going to get contaminated. If we are sampling after a scale of, let's say, half a decade, go back to the same location, we really can visualize that how well the nitrate pulse is moving, or there is a reduction in nitrate pulse or not. So generally, your nitrate pulse will be very sharp. And after 5 years, you may not see it to be that sharp, but it might be very much wide now because nitrate pulse is slowly moving. So it gives you an idea how many years it is taking to move through those profiles. And then you will see suddenly that might be a sand layer through which nitrate is just going through. As soon as it reaches there, it is going through very fast. So all this information is generated. And thinking of Vadose Zone and thinking of the size of an NRD, you are most likely collecting very few Vadose Zone cores for the entire size of the NRD. So just the physical cores may not give the entire information. We're trying to scale it up to NRD level or the state level. That is where modeling comes into play. Of course, the more high quality data you have, the more strong your model would be. And it is impossible to get core every other square feet, right? So model actually helps us understand and predict how quickly this nitrate plume is moving through. Having said that, some of the new findings over the past 3-4 years is that nitrate in the Vadose Zone is not just moving, so it's not just transporting. We are seeing nitrate getting converted to other nitrogen forms, which might be very slow moving. And NRDs are now getting interested on that kind of questions too. That, okay, fine, is my nitrate being converted? And the reason we need those information is that not only it's going to predict groundwater quality, but this is an untapped location. It's the Vadose Zone. Can we start thinking of devising technologies that can target Vadose Zone to remediate nitrate, even before it becomes a problem? Now, if let's say like our recent study that was done in Hastings Utilities, published in 2023, we observed that a simple change in irrigation practice from furrow irrigation, which uses a lot of water compared to a center pivot system, the amount of nitrate in the Vadose Zone is significantly less. Not only that, we are seeing ammonium, which is very slow moving due to a positive charge on top of it, is higher. So it looked like that something is happening in the Vadose Zone, which is converting this highly oxidizing nitrate, very fast moving nitrate, to this ammonium, which is completely reduced and slow moving. So is that a way to come up with a technology that can speed up this kind of reactions, reduce nitrate movement, or completely eliminate nitrate if we can do it? So for that, we need more understanding on how the Vadose Zone reactivity is, which can be both biogeochemical. And if we are able to identify that, can we tweak it to create beneficial nitrogen in the subsurface, which will not impact our groundwater resources? So those are the things that we are now asking questions along with our NRD partners, that how can we start studying it in this way to think of a future technology that can eliminate this problem, and can we do it? Of course, it's a huge problem, and not just in Nebraska, it is a global problem now. And Marie, if I missed anything on this one, please.
No, Arindam, you've done a great job of outlining it. And since this discussion is focused primarily on groundwater quality, I could lend and touch on just there's a quantity aspect of this too through all of this work, as we're learning not only about the nitrate loading through the Vadose Zone through our sampling effort, we're also, like Arindam saying, tracking speed and how many times has that water been extracted, gone through the system, so to speak, and been extracted and placed on the land surface. That information is going to be very valuable to us also with our water quantity groundwater models for the Upper Big Blue, looking at recharge numbers, being able to quantify how quickly water is recharging through the system.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective that I don't think is talked about too much. We're always talking about water quality, like you mentioned. So to reintroduce you, Marie, you're the assistant manager for the Upper Big Blue Natural Resources District for Nebraska. I kind of want to back up a little bit. We've been talking about NRDs now for a little while, but I think there's a lot of people in our audience that might not know what an NRD is and what they do, how they're unique maybe to Nebraska, and they have such an interesting structure. So would you mind giving us a quick overview of how NRDs function in Nebraska, what their purpose is?
I'd be happy to help out with that. The NRDs, there's 23 throughout the state of Nebraska. And what makes us unique from a lot of other states and how they govern groundwater is our boundaries are set on watershed boundaries rather than a county or a township boundary. And so it allows us to look at groundwater from a larger perspective, a more contiguous perspective, using the watershed. We were created in 1972 by legislative action. There were 4 very forward-thinking senators at the time who wanted to pull together a number of special purpose districts. A lot of them were on county boundaries, and get them working together to provide local solutions to local challenges, not only with groundwater, but with flood control, with erosion, with recreation. In all, the NRDs have 12 areas of responsibilities, like I said, ranging from flood control all the way to groundwater quantity and quality, and recreation and recycling, and the list goes on, the number of areas that NRDs touch. NRDs are governed by locally elected boards of directors, and each NRD has a different way that they break up their sub-districts for their directors. The Upper Big Blue, for example, has 17. We run 8 sub-districts across our boundary with 2 directors from each sub-district and 1 at large. And it's an honor to be, on a board of directors for an NRD, because you do touch so many different parts of communities, and, economic drivers for areas of the state. And each NRD has very different challenges and, that yields different successes. From the eastern part of the state, which, you're not really part of the Ogallala Aquifer, and you get a lot of rainfall, to the arid west, where the crops are different, the landscape is different, and the economies are driven by different industries. So it's a wonderful system. And when you travel, last week I was just at a conference with multiple states. The NRDs really are the envy, of the nation when it comes to groundwater quality and quantity management, because we're able to manage it so holistically and locally.
That was excellent. Thank you so much. I always find the NRDs are of huge interest to, especially our international partners, just how they function, and so forward thinking to set them up in Nebraska when they did, because I feel like it would be even harder now to implement such a structure. So thanks for that overview. So the Upper Big Blue NRD has partnered with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and the Nebraska Water Center in researching nitrate concentration in particular. Can you discuss the partnership and its importance to the district and the local community? And Rindam or Marie, whoever wants to kick us off is fine.
I'll speak quick just because I'm already unmuted. Our partnership with the university on this project has been invaluable. As Rindam alluded to earlier, a lot of these projects spark from prior data collection and ours was that way in the mid 90s. We went through and did, what at that time we thought was an extensive sampling, of the Vadose zone, and we had never gone back to revisit that. It wasn't until our project with the city of Hastings that and some questions asked by our board and by our constituents about the Vadose zone and loading and recharge and everything that this project could deliver for us. We thought it's time. It's been 30 years. We need to go back and revisit those sites. And so we've utilized past data, but we've also built upon it with this project. And we've actually more than doubled the number of sampling sites that were collected in the 90s. And part of that is because of, the university. We're able to partner with a land grant institution who, not only can help us secure some grant funding to help with these projects, but are also willing to put in some of their money to help collect the data because they see the value in it too. So it's been a very valuable partnership, through this project. And I think it's going to lead us to the next phase of data collection on water quality, that not only will we start to revisit this like every 5 or 10 years, these same sample spots, but we're asking more questions now that we're getting the information. And I think it's going to lead to further projects and partnerships down the road.
Thank you, Marie. That's a very good summary. And I really appreciate you putting in good words about land grant university and the mission of being a land grant university. Of course, as Mary mentioned, it's more of a partnership where it is a good data set for the NRD and also a very important research for the university here. And as Mary pointed out, that some of the work that we did in Hastings, in the city of Hastings, it really led us to this. And with this new information that we're generating in our with the NRD, Francis, we are asking more directed questions that, okay, fine, what happens to nitrogen if this is our surface practice? What happens? When will this become a major challenge in the parts where the water is still okay? Or is something happening in this part that is not contaminating the water? So we are able to ask more directed questions, especially on the nitrogen biogeochemical reactivity. On top of that, as Mary alluded to, that we were able to build upon the work that was done in the city of Hastings, and we added few more contaminants or co-contaminants that are an issue of our groundwater resources in the state, which is like arsenic and uranium are two big contaminants in our state. So we're able to incorporate some of this too in this present study, and it has both. And thanks, Marie, for pointing out the water quantity side of things. It has both part where we look into how nitrate pulse is moving. On top of that, this larger data scale that we are doing through this project, we are able to develop a model which has more data points and which is more usable for future groundwater quality challenges. So this has been a very good partnership and very fruitful partnership. And Mary already alluded that how local district and local communities are actually getting feedback out of this. So we do share our findings every year to the board by presenting on what's going on in the project and how we are planning our next step and what information we will be generating. So that has something which has helped me also, is to interact with this board members. Most of them are elected producers too, and they sometimes ask really good questions which has directly impact on, okay, what does it mean? How does it affect us? So those kind of questions actually help me and enriched me as a scientist to ask these kind of questions when I'm writing a proposal to safeguard our groundwater quality resources, or groundwater resources here, or protect our groundwater quality.
Yeah, that's an important thing to note too, that the Vadose Zone project tests for many contaminants, not just nitrate, that we're more focused on in today's podcast episode, but also kind of how those contaminants function together or influence one another is an important aspect too that can lead to more study. So Marie, this is maybe more targeted towards you, but Arvindam, you're welcome to chime in. But why is it so important to know if nitrate is present in the groundwater? And if high levels are found, how does it affect the decisions that your NRD makes or other water management decisions across the state? And what are some strategies that you might employ if those high levels are found?
Most NRDs have a groundwater management plan where they are outlining, their groundwater quality strategy, and many of them have action plans to say, okay, this is how we're going to carry out, this strategy. So in the Upper Big Blue, we have 12 sub groundwater quality management zones. We call them groundwater management zones, and it's part of our number 2 for groundwater quality. And then we sample annually or on a 3-year basis, depending upon its level of management, meaning the median nitrate level of the wells that we sample in there, from a dedicated network of irrigation and domestic wells, as well as some dedicated nested monitoring wells that the district owns and samples a couple times a year. The median nitrate level for a zone, like for instance, if for us to move into a phase 2 water quality management, the median nitrate level in our wells that we sample by zone would need to be 7 parts per million. And as we start to approach that contamination level, we're able to work with our board, to work on policies and review policies that require management practices from our producers if or when that zone were to trigger a phase 2 management. So in a phase 2 for us, we do require our producers, we want to see them at least once every 4 years for a training, and have dialogue and feedback from them along the way. We do require them to turn in a nitrogen report annually for fields where they're applying nitrogen or even rotating with a legume. We're tracking that. As we also move to like a phase 3 management for our district, which is where the median nitrate level is 10 parts per million. Then we take those phase 2 rules and we also add in nitrification inhibitors for all fall applied anhydrous that is applied. We require a more rigorous soil sampling requirement than in our phase 2 areas. And then we also require producers to bring a water sample in once every 3 years from their irrigation wells. And they have flexibility. We're happy to do the analysis for them for free and report that back, or they can send it off to a lab at their expense and have the analysis taken, and then they share the results with us. So it's a lot of education along throughout our groundwater quality programming, through, face-to-face trainings, through soil sampling, through reporting, through irrigation sampling. Those are all educational tools, that the Upper Big Blue is employing, to help our producers become more aware of nitrate and the contaminant, and also maybe help them, guide them into changing practices to something that's a little bit more sustainable. Through our partnerships with the university, and through the city of work done at the city of Hastings, we've been connected with a lot of great researchers that are not only just ag researchers, but biochemical and health researchers. Unfortunately, we do have watersheds within the Upper Big Blue NRD that see abnormally high incidences of pediatric brain cancer. In the 70s, nitrate was, it's harmful for infants and elderly. Well, now we're learning that perhaps people that have other immunocompromising conditions, could be impacted by nitrates. There's a lot of questions that go along with that we need partners like the university and UNMC to help us get the answers. And these projects like with Arindum are bringing those people to us to help us find the answers.
And so, Marie, you mentioned the well testing, which is a super important part of managing water kind of farm by farm too, of more of maybe more comprehensive view. Is that data ever used with the Vadose Zone project data, or can you kind of compare and contrast why you might use the Vadose Zone data for certain things or the well data, or if those ever work together to help you manage groundwater quality?
Oh, I definitely think that they work together to help create a better picture of what's going on. I mean, Arendam said, alluded or said before, we do capture some poor water samples as went through our sampling process. But I think the educational tool of collecting that irrigation sample for the producers to know how much nitrate is in that sample and the credit that can be taken by pumping that water and applying it during the growing season, along with some of the reports that we get from the Vadose project and share with them for a producer to see, well, geez, what's the nitrate load, that's headed toward the aquifer, then educating on how can I slow that plume down, or like Arendam had said earlier, or hopefully maybe stop it altogether, from moving, or taking those credits, it's a lot of educating, but they work hand in hand. And I think then if we can take this, to the next step of looking at land management practices and their impact to that rate of nitrate movement, I think the farmer will have a big picture of their operation, their management strategies, and how it's impacting, good or bad groundwater quality. Part of our project is doing interviews with all of our cooperating farmers before we go out and take a sample, where we're asking, what practices did you do last year? What practices did you do, at this point in time in history and at this point in time in history? And as we're looking at 20, 30 years worth of Vadose data, being able to peg that, in the vertical, well, here's where they were continuous till, and here's where, potentially where they switched to no till and split application, or this is where they were all fall applied anhydrous here at at this time frame. That's going to help us learn a lot. And I think it's going to help our board as we move forward with science-based, policy is going to, I think, be what's going to turn the tide, as far as the NRD is concerned. It would not be fruitful if we don't have producer buy-in. And that's where the science is going to help them be more willing to discuss and potentially adopt new management practices.
Thanks, Marie. I wanted to go back to a term you used, credit, and just could you talk a little bit about what you mean by nitrogen credit and how using that credit might reduce future contamination of soil and groundwater?
Nitrogen credits have been around as long as the university's algorithm, and as long as, not just the university's algorithm, but any algorithm that producers or trusted advisors use to set a nitrogen rate. You can take credits for different parts of a nitrogen formula, whether it's your residual soil nitrate, whether it's manure applications, if it's a legume credit, but there's also the component of a nitrate, groundwater nitrate credit. So for every inch of water that you're applying, depending upon your analysis from your nitrate test, you can take a credit for that nitrate, because you're putting the nitrate on that's already in the groundwater to the growing crop, and it's fixating and using that. And then in theory, you should be able to reduce that total nitrogen that you're applying for the crop, dependent upon, that nitrate credit from your irrigation sample.
And that sounds like such a win-win, because you're taking that extra nitrogen in the water, you're using it on your crop, and you're saving money and time by not having to apply as much nitrogen. Is that an accurate assessment?
Yes, that was a far more streamlined answer than the long one that I gave.
No, thank you. I just want to make sure I understand that correctly, but I think that's an important thing to note too for those who don't live in farming communities that are similar to Nebraska, to kind of know how that functions to reduce that contamination, but also just as good business practice, I think. So Arindam, the Upper Big Blue NRD is just one partner that's involved in the Vadose Zone project. Can you talk about who else benefits from the project, maybe other NRDs that you're working with or communities, how it benefits others within the state of Nebraska?
Sure, yeah. So groundwater by far is the largest water source that Nebraskans or we use for our daily use, which includes drinking too. So any research, any project that is trying to understand this important water source that we have, which sustains our economy, sustains our livelihood, is very critical. So everyone who is using it is benefited by this project. Every community that has either directly through irrigation or consumption or indirectly is associated with utilizing groundwater is a partner in this project, because the data that you are generating in a small system can be easily scaled up, especially on those models that we're talking about. Upper Big Blue NRDs, as Mary mentioned, as you mentioned, and Mary also suggested that we learn from each other, right? So the City of Hastings project kind of led the NRD board to ask these questions, and then we are revisiting this after 30 years and expanded it than what it was done back in the 1990s. So it clearly shows that how a project, an ongoing project, information that has come out from one small project at City of Hastings has started creating this collaboration where researchers across different disciplines are coming together to understand this fundamental problem of groundwater quality challenge that we are facing right now. So it has helped, which Mary alluded to and summarized really well, plan timely actions. So use this knowledge to find solutions to future groundwater quality challenges. I already talked about Hastings ASR well system. Mary talked about NRDs defining different phases and implementing different approach on how things are getting applied so that this can be delayed or completely getting rid of. Along with our Google NRD, other NRDs that we have worked together is Center Platte NRD, Little Blue, Lower Platte South, Lower Platte North, Upper Republican, Pacquiao, Missouri NRD, Nemaha, Lower Loop, and through some of the projects that I'm leading, we are revisiting these NRDs again, partnering with them and starting to see, okay, irrigation practices impact on nitrogen or not, because at the end of the day, we want to find a solution to this problem. Outside NRDs, we have, as Maria alluded multiple times, City of Hastings, City of Syracuse, City of Wilbur, Waverly, Springfield. We have other partners in Brazil groundwater management area. All three NRDs are equally involved. So it's not just one NRD, and we are in it together. Almost all the NRDs learn from each other too. For example, one thing that we were invited recently to Lower Loop NRD, with whom I'm meeting tomorrow, and we discussed about their ongoing Vadose Zone project, and we talked about our ongoing Vadose Zone project. Upper Big NRD talks about their project and learns from each other, and how can we together expand our knowledge. So this collaborative opportunity is unique. It's not just the university faculty members, but university faculty members with NRDs, and not just one NRD. NRDs are learning from each other, and together we are producing new knowledge that has helped in reciprocal planning. So planning on the kind of questions we want to ask as researchers when we're trying to solve the nitrogen problem, and build up research team, which is not just within the university, partnering with the local NRDs where we want to go back, study that observation that has come through an NRD partnership, but study through a different research funding, and learn, okay, fine, this is the problem. Can we solve it? So there's a large team into play. And as this data is generated, NRDs are not only learning and collaborating, and not only we are learning from NRDs, NRD partners, but NRD also learning from each other. And then in some projects where university was not directly involved, NRD has initiated their own research. They are also inviting university faculty members out there to showcase what they are doing and how they are approaching to the problem. So it has been a very collaborative atmosphere between university and faculty members and NRDs to really understand and solve this challenge that we are facing and ensure that our groundwater resources are well protected.
That was really well said, Arindam. We are in an age of learning when it comes to groundwater quality, and it has been such a collaborative effort across all types of entities and partnerships that it's been a pretty amazing time, to be trying to answer these questions and to collect data to provide scientific answers.
So a question that I've been wondering is if there's similar research like this done in other states or other areas, and if not, is there an interest shown by other states, or is this pretty unique to Nebraska, just like our NRDs? And what would it take, I guess, for someone to replicate this? I mean, obviously it's almost 40 years worth of data, but if someone were to want to start this so that they could kind of have a baseline of their Vadose zone and potential water quality impact.
Other states have been doing similar research, but if you are thinking of like Vadose zone has been studied for multiple contaminants, like in Hanford site, where it was primarily studied for uranium mobilization, but specifically for nitrogen or the nitrate problem, Nebraska is a state which has not only studied this, but it's continuously studying it and investing more on this research. California is another state which has been heavily involved in understanding nitrate loss and leaching through the Vadose zone, and has been doing research, exceptional research on Vadose zone for quite a long period of time. And California and Nebraska has been leading the way in nitrogen research. One thing that we have started over the last half a decade or so is that we are now just not focusing on nitrate alone, as you did too, that we're also looking into other contaminants, other co-contaminants. Now we are also looking to other form of nitrogen in the Vadose zone, because there was a paper that came out back in 2019. It talked about missing nitrogen pieces. And to really understand the nitrogen problem, just targeting nitrate will be like being blindfolded and touching a small part of a big elephant. So the part you touch, you think that's the problem. So now what we are doing is in the newer projects that we are getting involved into is that we are not looking only at nitrate, but we're looking into all other form of nitrogen, which is very unique for our state to do, is that we are not trying to do a proper nitrogen budgeting. What is the stock of, when we say nitrogen, we just don't mean nitrate, but we mean almost any N form that is measurable. So that is something, is a unique start that Nebraska has. On top of that, this NRD thing that you mentioned about our NRDs, it's a very unique thing. And Marie, as you mentioned about conferences, I take the same pride when I discuss NRD research in some scientific conferences I visit, and I take a slide to describe them what NRD is. And just like you have been getting these questions, I get the same kind of questions where they really like the approach that our state has in protecting our natural resources, not just groundwater, but also surface water and soil. So this is a unique advantage that Nebraska has, which others, I don't think others have this kind of a very holistic approach towards protecting our natural resources. Other state, as you mentioned, Iowa is also there, Texas is there. Then if you do a quick search, you will come across like research from Wisconsin, Oregon, Indiana, Maryland, Washington. Washington is primarily the Hanford site. Too was another location. So nitrate is a problem throughout US. states which are intensively managed, and Vadose zone is the conduit linking this nitrogen from our land surface to the groundwater. So other states have started looking into this long-term studies that we have done. They have started learning about our Nebraska Vadose Zone webpage that we maintain and publicly share our data with our stakeholders. Even through the projects, whenever I interacted with Mary, you also mentioned that we talk with our producers before we go down digging hole in their property. Even they have come back and asked that, hey, what is the nitrogen profile you have got? Like recently, earlier this year, we were down in Imaha NRD, and we were in a cropland of two farmers, and both of them said that, hey, once the data is processed, please share the data with us. I want to see how the nitrogen profile looks like, and also share all the other nitrogens that you are measuring. So they are also interested in learning this. So outside US, China is definitely doing a lot of research on Vadose zone right now. Rather, they surpassed on a number of publications that is coming out of China on Vadose zone research. New Zealand is another one. Europe is heavily invested in it because a lot of agricultural production, same is with China too, and same in New Zealand. Mostly the issue is from vegetable production and use of dairy manure as their fertilizer source. In China, it is primarily fertilizer application, inorganic fertilizer application, and very uncontrolled inorganic fertilizer application has started deteriorating their groundwater quality over there. So they have now a lot of papers coming over the past decade or so. And second is US, which has also got quite a few publications coming out, or intense research is coming out. But now slowly the approach towards Vadose zone is changing too. So if you look at earlier 2015, 2016, 2017, or early research was primarily about transport, how quickly my contaminant is moving. Now the research is also focused on, okay, not only how quickly my contaminant is moving, is there any co-contamination that is happening? Or is my contaminant getting reduced or retarded or slowed down or converted to some other benign forms or beneficial forms or not? So now research is slowly going to that direction where the nitrogen problem is getting looked into through a different lenses right now. So this partnership, Francis, to sum up, is not just within our NRDs, even other states are learning. Like recently, I was in a meeting for the 4045 group where I talked about our ongoing Vadose zone research on other forms of nitrogen, and they were really excited to see the way we are looking into the nitrogen problem and not focusing on nitrate only. So everybody's excited to learn from each other and emulate that what can we do better. And one advantage that Nebraska has that we are, as I mentioned last year, that we are a little bit ahead of the curve because we have this huge data set from the past. So we can go back to these locations and ask more directed questions towards this groundwater quality problem that we're trying to solve together.
It's great to hear that the work is so collaborative, but also that it's shared publicly. And so others can learn how to replicate that or use that information to make changes or do similar research in their own states. So that's all that I have for today, but I wanted to give you an opportunity. If there's anything that we missed talking about that you'd like to mention, I wanted to give you some time to do that. So is there anything else?
Yeah, I just would like to thank you, Francis, for being such a wonderful host, and thanks for inviting Mary because she really explained how NRD partnership with the university works and how we are learning from each other. So I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about Vadose zone. But sometimes if things are not visible, we don't worry about it. So this definitely will make groundwater more accessible to our audience. Thank you.
And thanks, Arindam, for sitting on here to explain, the really scientific parts of our project and how Vadose Zone, everything that's being tracked, and Francis for inviting me to be a part of this today. We're in an age where there's a lot of different stakeholders asking questions, about groundwater quality, and it's been in turn an awesome opportunity to find collaborating partners to find the answers. So I don't look for any of these partnerships to go stale. We're going to continue to find the answers and try to be better stewards and find more sustainable practices.
Well, thank you both for coming on today and sharing your wealth of knowledge. And as a Nebraskan, it's relieving that these partnerships are happening. even though we don't always hear about them front and center. But what a wealth of long-term data that we have, that we can kind of see how our soil and water is being affected and how we can make changes to make sure we protect that for the next generation. So thank you so much for all the work you put into this throughout the years, and I appreciate you taking the time today. That concludes this episode of the Water for Food podcast. We'll include a link to the Nebraska Vadose Zone project in our show notes so people can check out that data, learn a little bit more about the project and its importance. And we hope you join us next time for another insightful conversation on the critical issues of water and food security.
Thanks for joining us this time on the Doherty Water for Food podcast. Make sure to visit our website, waterforfood.nebraska.edu, to view show notes or subscribe so you don't miss future episodes.